As he had all week, he watched from his kitchen window. The unthinkable had been happening at 7 in the morning for 7 days. As the hour hand hit 7, he laid his coffee aside, and it occurred. Minnesota parent Greg Banduxi was typical. As a small diner proprietor, Greg woke up early to make his town breakfast. Greg loved his predictable life. Until that fateful week. Greg and Cheryl, who was pregnant with their first child, moved to Minnesota in their late 20s. Minnesota's seemingly endless natural features attracted him. Greg considered it the best place to raise a family. After settling in, he bought an old restaurant and renovated it into a popular diner that became his livelihood. His life was perfect. Greg raised his family in Minnesota. This time, he saw everything his town had to offer. He saw animals on the streets at night and early morning. Wildlife services intervened several times when dangerous animals strayed into town. He'd seen nothing like that week. Greg had a typical week. As usual, he woke up at 5 and planned the day before making breakfast for his family. With everything done, he got dressed and stood by the kitchen window to take in the sunrise as he sipped his coffee. It happened then. Screams greeted Greg. A shout of excitement, not fear. Laughs followed a giggle. If you like my videos, don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks in advance. Greg's neighborhood had peaceful mornings. Why was this one different? Greg left without his coffee. He looked back. Greg saw school children. They followed Greg's neighbor's 10-year-old son, Miles. Greg intervened because the kids were bullying Miles. When he caught Miles, he was about to call the kids out. A small deer grazed before Miles. The boy followed the deer, curious. Greg smiled. It wasn't abnormal for kids to watch or even play with deer, especially ones as young as the one before Miles. Back home. If only he understood. Tomorrow was the same. Greg heard the kids screaming and yelling, and when he hurried out, Miles was walking behind the tiny deer. Greg knew something was up as the week went on. Greg knew he had to investigate Miles and the deer by Friday. He placed a camera on his garage door the day before to watch the 10-year-old. The camera footage showed him nothing new. Miles walked the deer every morning at 7 before returning it to the woods. What happened? Greg woke up earlier than usual on Friday. He planned the day and made breakfast by 6. He waited in the kitchen window for Miles and his friend with a hot coffee. Nothing happened for minutes. However, kids left their homes to wait for Miles, a rock star, at 7. Miles didn't arrive after a minute. As the second minute ended, he emerged at the neighborhood's farthest point, the deer walking beside him from lawn to lawn. Greg understood then. He fled the house, racing to Miles. Greg wondered about Miles all week. He zoned out at work several times trying to solve this wonderful mystery. Everything made sense as he cut the damp grass. Despite unlocking the mystery, he was far from the truth. His feeding the deer, Greg thought as he finally neared the two. He slowed to avoid scaring the animal. The closer he got, the more he understood. Greg had never seen a deer's eyes. As Miles walked with the deer, they were milky gray and blind. Everything clicked then. Miles took his time in the morning to help the blind deer find grass. Greg's jaw dropped at the revelation, and he stepped back, still confused. His son had a rare tray. Greg had to act now. As much as his son had done, he didn't have the resources to help the deer as an adult could. Greg went further. He would take over and help the deer. A week later, an IDNR-licensed wildlife rehabilitation group took the deer. Greg and Miles' parents explained everything and praised him for his duty and responsibility. He assured them he was glad the deer would get help. Greg and Cheryl relaxed after saving the deer. They didn't know their son's potential. Few weeks later, he ran into the house with important news. He explained the situation. Concerned another deer. Their son felt compelled to help another deer. It wasn't what they expected. He insisted they follow him. They walked to their house's road. They would soon understand Miles' distress. But what happened when they investigated their son's cry for help was unimaginable. Greg saw what his son meant when he reached the road. The ground had a thorn. Greg panicked. He prayed the animal wasn't hit by a car. Something was very wrong. The deer was lying strangely. It appeared to be lying defensively. Things only got stranger. Cheryl told Greg it was probably hiding from predators. She looks young. She was lost without her mother's guidance. Their son found another injured deer. The family knew they couldn't ignore the poor thing's danger. The lonely fawn could be hit by a car if it stayed on the road. While planning a rescue, the family watched the fawn. The family had no idea what was behind them. The family heard rustling behind. They turned to see what was approaching, but what happened next was unexpected. They had no idea what was behind the sounds. Was something evil waiting for them to leave the fawn? Perhaps a predator waited. Knowing the deer was easy prey without humans. They had to save it. Greg helped the animal despite a low predator risk. He couldn't refuse his son's pleading eyes. To succeed, they had to act quickly. Greg approached slowly. It wouldn't hurt him, but he didn't want to scare it. He had to approach to act. Greg tried not to scare the roadside animal as he crept closer. As he approached, he ensured the animal was comfortable. He was near. He just had to slowly pick up the animal and move it to safety. If not careful, the fawn could fight. Greg held the deer. When the animal fought him, he crossed the road. He couldn't drop it now. If it hits asphalt now, it could be seriously injured. Greg held on until he crossed the road. He would rescue the fawn. Greg heard the rustling again after bringing the fawn to the woods. The fawn was hunted again. Greg stopped it from killing. He moved faster and placed his back between the animal and fawn. He was ready for the predator to rip into his back. Next was the most unexpected thing ever. Greg turned to face his attacker but saw something surprising. Behind him was a doe. It was clear what she was after, and he'd have to relinquish the fawn or suffer her wrath. Slowly lowering the baby, it ran toward its mother. They were safe together. Greg was thrilled to see the fawn safely with its mother. They could relax. Miles was jumping for joy when the family saw everyone was safe. Greg rejoined his family across the road and watched the beautiful event. They stood together. The mother checked on her baby by smelling him. Greg hoped his scent wouldn't confuse the fawn. That happened before. Animal mothers can abandon their offspring if they smell a human. The family silently watched the beautiful moment they had just seen. However, they now feared a deterioration. Thankfully, the mother licked her child and they bounced into the trees. Greg was proud of his son for saving two animals that needed humans. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in the next video.